Welcome everyone to the Bridges Out of Poverty overview for individuals. We have only an hour to go over everything, so I'm going to do my best to get through it as quickly as possible. I want to introduce Linda Kelly, our co-presenter as well. So she will be chiming in with me. We will be unmuting you at particular times, and we just ask if you are not speaking to mute yourself. So at the top of the screen, you can do the pull down menu and choose mute over to the left. So I'm just going to pull this up. Great. So as we go through, this is our agenda. We're going to go through some quick introductions. If you can, in the chat box, you don't need to type your name pops up, but if you can list your organization and just something new and good about what's going on in your life really quickly. This is something that we do at all of our Working Cities meetings, and it's a reminder to us that you are more than your job, that you have a life, and that's an important part of this community. So just type in something new and good and we'll report back, and everyone can take a look at those in the chat box. So I will report that I was really psyched last night to make homemade pizza for my partner's kids, where I was able to puree vegetables into the sauce and nobody knew that they were eating Swiss chard. So bravo to me. Okay, the chat function is working really slowly. I'm not sure what's going on. Oh, there we go. So Linda, your sister sent a delicious vegetarian recipe this morning. Lo got your first pick of the painting for 10 by 10. That's awesome. I hope you posted on Facebook. So while you're typing that in, we're going to talk a little bit about what is Working Cities, what makes a city a working city. We'll be talking about resources in the context of being under-resourced, having enough resources or too much resources in our community, and then very briefly touch on some of the key concepts of the Bridges Out of Poverty model. So, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you can be involved and next steps if you want to dive deeper into some of these issues. So let's see, Zach got to reconnect with a client today for Nourish Pittsfield. That's great. Karen, I see that you are getting this chat. I am getting your chat. And Alex, at the Athenaeum got to take your dog on a hike yesterday afternoon. I assume that's not this afternoon. Or you do get to take your dog on a hike this afternoon. That's great as the weather gets nicer. Okay. So we're just going to get started here. So Working Cities Pittsfield, I assume if you're on this webinar, you have a basic understanding of what we do, but it's a cross-sector collaboration where we work with all of our partners, and by cross-sector, that's government, education, health, nonprofit, for-profit businesses, all coming together with residents to solve some of our problems, and with the goal of making the city a just, thriving, and safe community. So we view Pittsfield as a community of hope and opportunity, and we hope that through our work, residents will be valued for their expertise and voice, and that we can break down those barriers to opportunity. This is a model out of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and they've challenged cities to work together to solve their problems. So I'm gonna see if I can unmute folks here and ask you to talk about, unmute, what it is that makes a city a working city. So hold on a second as we're on. You can unmute yourself, but I'm trying to unmute you. Okay. So who, if anyone wants to start. What makes a city a working city? I'm not hearing anybody. Or you can type it into the chat if you're having trouble. So, okay, Lo's not on audio, but she can type city working to be the best it can be. Olivia, I just saw you're new and good. It is sunny. Anybody else have an idea of what makes a working city?
Yeah, events around the city that engage people. Here in Pittsfield, we have a lot of cultural activities, among other things.
Yes. Feelings of trust between different sectors and neighborhoods. Thank you, Libby. Anybody else? I mean, it's important that everybody in the city or is valued. It's important that they work together toward common goals. One of the challenges in Pittsfield is the silos between working organizations, even ones that have the same or similar goals. And so the more we can collaborate and build our civic infrastructure so that more people are involved, the better we will work together. And that's sort of the goal of working cities.
And the more that people engage with one another, the more vibrant a city is.
Yes. Okay. So we wanted to share some basic data points for this Pittsfield metropolitan area and why that's important when we talk about a working city. So in the population in Berkshire County and Pittsfield, the number of employees, the average salaries when you look at between men and women, and then even when you dive down deeper into census tracts, you have the different neighborhoods and what their median family incomes are. And there's a huge difference between downtown, West Side, and Morningside, which are working cities targeted neighborhoods. And when you get to Williamstown West, New Ashford, and Hancock, and what that means when there's such a disparity in our community, whether the spaces that people occupy feel welcoming, whether people have even time to participate in our civic structure. The poverty rate in Berkshire County is 13%, and it's about the average around the US, but what that means and where resources are placed in the city. So there's an economic cost to that inequality. Linda, did you want to speak for a moment on this? Okay.
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Sure, yes. It's only recently that people are starting to track this. I mean, you know intuitively that there's a problem when there's a huge gap, and this is the largest gap that there has been in now many more than 30 years. It's the largest gap since the Great Depression of 1929. And when this is happening, when there's such a gap between people who have more than adequate resources and people who have less than adequate resources, it puts the people with less resources at an increasingly behind. And this particularly shows up over the generations now, when people who are disadvantaged in terms of resources are now under investing in education. So they are not having the tools to be able to get themselves ahead.
Great. So when Pittsfield was challenged with the Working Cities Challenge grant, there were a number of listening sessions held around the city that we talk about a lot, the outcome of that, and our understanding of how our neighbors are getting by and what they struggle with, and what the barriers to participation and success are. There's this sense of cultural competency and understanding what it means to create welcoming spaces, that people don't feel welcome, they feel isolated, that there's a lot of, there are a lot of barriers to getting services. So the group of organizations that came together decided to work on the Bridges Out of Poverty model. And so we're gonna talk about that today. There are 3 pillars within this model. One is on the individual level, which we'll be talking about today. There's the institution or organizational model, and that can be seen as an organization or a business. And you can see it through the lens of community. So the city can also be under-resourced and what that means for our community. So when we talk about poverty and being, we talk about the extent to which an individual, an organization, or community goes without resources. And that's the model that we're basing this on. We're talking about looking at things through the lens of class, and whether you are under-resourced, you have enough resources, or you have too many resources. And we know that there's people like that all over our community. So what does it mean to be under-resourced? Well, if you are what we consider middle class, you have enough resources to get by. So if you think of your resource space as a suitcase, and here we have a well-packed suitcase, everything fits nicely in it, that's what it is to be middle class. You have enough resources to get by. Maybe there's a tiny bit left over if you decide to go on a trip and pick up something new to bring home. And so that you would consider your savings or planning for retirement and things like that. Now, if you're wealthy and you have an abundance of resources, you have this extra space in your suitcase. So you have room for everything that you need, plus all the extras that you want to bring back with you from your trip. But if you are under-resourced, you have a small suitcase and a lot of things spilling out of it. And what that means is there's no room for extra. There's barely enough, or there's not enough room for everything that you need. So things spill out the side, and while you're paying attention to that spilling out the side, the other side spills off, and it's really hard to get a grip on everything going on in that suitcase. And so that's what we're talking about. That's an illustration of that. So, and what this means is there are these, because of what you have to focus on, there are these hidden rules about time and money across different classes. There's poverty, where you're really focused on survival. Relationships, in the sense that relationships are needed to get by. That's why there's a star. It's not like, am I gonna go get to hang out with my friends today? It's, do I have a relationship with the person that can take care of my kids if my childcare falls through, or I don't have childcare, or someone who can fix my car if I don't have money, or someone I can borrow money from to pay my bills. If you're in the middle class, you focus on work. There's a work ethic, this concept of you have to work, you have to achieve things and get ahead and get promotions, and a material security of making sure that you have the things that you need, that you're planning for your retirement, you have a savings, maybe you plan for a little bit for vacation. And that doesn't mean that these aren't values that someone who's under-resourced has, that they share those values. It's that they're so focused on survival, it is really hard to think farther ahead. And then in the wealth model, you have a lot more focus on your political connections, your financial connections, your social connections, because you need those to survive. You need to know that the person managing your finances isn't going to steal from you, that the person managing your extra house is going to take care of it properly. You have more than you can manage on your own. And it's really hard to move out of poverty into the middle class and wealth. It's a lot easier to fall back. If you lose money, somebody in the middle class can still be living paycheck to paycheck. And so it's very easy to slip into being under-resourced just by losing a job. But for poverty, we know that there are a lot of obstacles to getting ahead. So we're going to talk a little bit about the hidden rules of class. And I've been talking about this a lot on TV and radio lately, but this is really something that we can delve into, what it means, what you're focused on in each of these resources on the left, the categories, depending on where you fall on the resource scale. So if you're in poverty and you're under-resourced, your possessions are people. You need them to get by, as I said before. Money is to be used and spent. You never have extra to save or focus on something bigger. Do you have enough food? Is there enough to feed your kids? And what are you going to do if you don't have that? There's sort of, if you're in middle class, you focus on possessions as things. So you get the TV and all the extras that you want in your house, the nice dishwasher, the name brand clothing and things like that. Money is to be managed, so you have your checking account and your credit cards, and you have enough to pay all those, but you have to pay all, you manage it, and you plan for your retirement and 401k and vacations and things like that. You focus on work and achievement. And so you can see when you go across the line how different, and a little bit similar, but how different they can be depending on where a person falls in resources. So the way we speak can be different if you were raised, if you're second or third generation being under-resourced, the way you speak is actually different than someone in the middle class and someone who's wealthy. I remember when I used to work with someone who was extraordinarily wealthy, it always confused me when she referred to her children by their first and last names. It was very confusing to me, but that was a different way of speaking. And there's nothing wrong with any of those ways that we speak or any of these different values. It's just what we need to focus on to get by and survive. So again, the driving forces for these classes are survival, relationships, and sort of entertainment, and the fact that it is a release or an escape from the struggles of every day for people who are under-resourced, work and achievement, and financial and political. So what we need to know when we're in our community is that individuals bring with them these hidden rules, and we don't know about it. So when we talk about a hidden rule, these are things that are unsaid. You don't know that you don't know them when you walk into a room, and the people in the room don't know that you don't know them. And it's nothing that happens on purpose. For instance, you have your hidden rules in your family, where sometimes some families share food at meals, and I can go over and grab a French fry from my sister's plate. But I may have dinner with somebody else, and if I grab that French fry, they are going to lose it. It makes them feel really uncomfortable. And they're like, "What are you doing?" And we didn't know that they were uncomfortable with that. We just came in with our own assumptions. And so that's the way that works in our interactions. So put into the chat box again, what are the unspoken rules for your family? What are the unspoken rules for your workplace? So you may have, thanks to whoever just joined us. I'm going to see if I can take a look here. Oh, maybe not, someone just dinged in. So what are those unspoken rules? They're different in your house and in your family than they are in your workplace, and how you treat someone and what's expected. So Linda just added, hidden rules are those rules that everyone in the group knows, so nobody has to say them out loud. And knowing the unspoken rules is one way people decide who belongs in each of these resource groups. That's true. Anybody else want to add something? Whoops. Anybody else? Wondering if you're all eating your lunch and distracted. This is hard to think about. Okay, take a moment to consider. Humor is different, Zach. Yes, what we find funny. So I think about, let's see. Oh, Alex, your internet is going in and out. I'm sorry. Okay. We will have additional webinars. Okay. So it may be that, you know, in your workplace, people have lunch together and you didn't know that. I think that happened here at Habitat for me. Everyone was eating lunch and I was up in my office all by myself and no one thought to ask me to come in. They just thought I knew. Everybody eats lunch together. And I'm up here like, oh, nobody wants to hang out with me. Or, you know, how the copier gets used. Libby says her family places value on not littering, whereas her friends have grown up where it was of no consequence and not a big deal. So Linda notes that at home it's okay to finish sentences when family members are speaking. At work, that's not okay. Yeah. I interrupt my dad all the time. I'm like, get to the point. So there's things like that. And understanding that when a new person comes into your group, into a space that you want to be welcoming, is sharing those rules as best you can. And if someone seems a little awkward, they may not know those rules. And this is one of the reasons why for Working Cities Wednesday, we always set the ground rules at the beginning. This is what's expected of you, so that people know how to play the game. Like, if you see life as a game in that sense, then they know how to use the rules of the game to take their own opportunities. So when we talk about resources, we're not just talking about financial resources. There are a number of different resources that are important in your life that you need to draw on at any given time when obstacles or problems are thrown at you or you are reaching to achieve something. Finances is just one of them, and it's what we talk about a lot in for people who are living in poverty. Oh, we just got a new one from Zach. Under-resourced people generally use humor as a therapeutic thing to laugh at horrible personal events or circumstances, which generally shock more formal or wealthier class. I don't know if it has a name, but usually get a look that's part pity, part shock, and part disgust. You gotta have a sense of humor, right? And Lo is agreeing. So yes, I think it's true. We maybe a little darker sense of humor because we're just dealing with some dark things and we have to make light of it. So our additional resources can be emotional and mental health, your spiritual belief in a greater purpose, your physical health, your support systems, whether you have relationships and role models that can help you achieve, and this knowledge of the hidden rules. And if you're lacking in any one of those categories, it makes life a little bit harder and you're struggling to catch up. And so imagine someone who is, much more greatly under-resourced, you're much more unstable. So I like to keep that up for a minute because we're going to be talking about how. So when we have a program called Getting Ahead, we help individuals who are struggling to get ahead to understand these resources, that it's not always finances. If you have 3 jobs and you're paying the bills, it's whether your other resources are aligned toward your goals in life. So, and these resources come into play when we talk about our mental models of class. The mental model is something that you are focused on for a great deal of your time. So if you think about the mental model for the middle class, we have the word achievement in the middle because that's a very high priority and value to those households and individuals. And you can see around the circle are things like education and your careers, planning for retirement, building up some assets if you can, taking vacation. Can focus a little bit on health and prevention, family items. And if you come from a middle class background, none of this is surprising. It's where we focus a lot of our attention. Now, if you're looking at the mental model of being under-resourced, the center here is relationships and how important they are to meeting our basic needs. If you're under-resourced, you're living in the now, you're just trying to survive and get by and try to stay afloat. And so your focus it can be very different. You spend more time in an agency to get support or extra support. You have transportation issues likely, especially in Pittsfield and Berkshire County. You still have family. There may be legal issues and criminal justice issues. You can have, meeting your basic needs, food, clothing, housing, healthcare, childcare, and entertainment, again, as a release and escape from those struggles. And at the core, again, is those relationships to help meet those needs. But notice the similarities and notice the differences. So family and friends are still a value, jobs, mental health and chemical dependency, that can affect anybody. And so thinking about those values that we share, those commonalities and those threads. And then our mental model for wealth, which always fascinates folks in our circles here. So this applies to the 1%, which is categorized as anyone making $7.8 million or more. Safety is a big issue for somebody who's extremely wealthy. Your kids could get kidnapped outside of school. They have to think about that. They plan on charitable giving, their legacy, education, leisure. So very different types of things, but still similarities between some of the other classes. So family and friends, mental health and chemical dependency crosses over health. So you can look at those differences there. So 3 things help you move out of poverty: education, supportive relationships, and full-time employment. And that takes a lot of work to develop. And so that's one of the things that our Bridges community is trying to build up for everyone here, making sure that there's educational opportunity, that we build those supportive relationships and sense of community, what we call social capital. and we connect people to full-time employment. So one of the things I was talking about before about being under-resourced and sort of that suitcase model, we call that the tyranny of the moment. Your bandwidth is loaded with meeting your basic needs. So sometimes for me, I have a crazy day, you know, I'm middle class and I might have a lot of responsibilities at work that distract me and keep me up. But for the most part, I have time to think and plan and some, you know, and focus on and prioritize things. But for someone who's under-resourced, they are constantly in this, thrown into this, what can be chaos. So you're no, you know, very few times is a day just normal. There's something going on. If your hot water heater breaks, if your car breaks, you suddenly are thrown into meeting these basic needs, and you know what you have cobbed together to survive is thrown off, and you have to focus on that tyranny of the moment. So and what that can mean for setting you back and why it is so hard to be stable when you're under-resourced. If my car breaks down, I may miss a day of work, or I may show up late and get fired. And what will that do when I'm just barely meeting my basic needs and suddenly I can't pay rent or the electric bill and things like that? So that tyranny constantly comes up. And I think, you know, the more I've circulated with and have friends, I can see that in a different way now. It's not, oh, this person is a hot mess and I don't want to deal with it. This person needs support because they're under-resourced. And that's the reason why this chaos keeps ensuing. And so understanding that with our neighbors is really important. And for employers to understand that as well when things like this happen. But this tyranny can come from not just the individuals, but all three levels here. So you know, I was talking about individuals, but this happens for institutions and organizations and businesses who are running grant to grant. They often do things like cutting salaries, you know, use bankruptcy as a business. So this can impact that, and also our community. So what it means for the city is, we could definitely argue the city of Pittsfield is in a sense in this tyranny of the moment, as we're dealing from budget to budget, cutting programs, reducing benefits, and hoping that we're going to balance out in the end. And so the focus tends to be on how do we save money and not how do we plan on the future. And that's really what the tyranny prevents, is this future story, this future planning. It's not that you don't care about the future. It's not that it's not something you want or you don't value that future story. It's really hard to get there because you're caught in that tyranny. Okay, so the next model, we're doing good on time. The next model is around our registers of language. And so what I want to talk about is the different registers first, and then talk about some of the differences when we talk about the classes. So there's frozen language, things like the Bible and vows and the Pledge of Allegiance. That language doesn't change, it's constant. There's formal language, which is always complete sentences, so things that are in formal documents, legal documents, the way that we speak in court or at a public hearing. Those are very formal ways of speaking. And we don't always do that, but it is, we do that in very specific places in our world. Consultative, which is also a formal register, but it's used in conversation. So what I'm doing now is consultative, and in the classroom, working with agencies, it's a formal register. We're looking for specific ways for language. Then there's casual language register that we use in more familial settings with your friends. And it's a 400 to 800 word vocabulary, but it's not because people who use Casual Register don't have a greater vocabulary. You don't have to explain as much. And you finish each other's sentences, and you're using some basic words that amongst your family or friends. Sometimes we don't have complete sentences. We just say, hey, salt and pepper. And then in the intimate setting, there's language between lovers or twins, so something that you wouldn't say to anybody else. And when that language is used in a context outside of consensual, it can be considered sexual harassment and harassment, because it can make people feel uncomfortable. So when we talk about these patterns of discourse, there's formal, which is very direct. So if you're in an agency, you ask a question, what do you need today? You expect a basic answer of, I need, I need heating assistance today. What tends to happen with individuals who are from a poverty background is they're much more used to a casual register and a casual pattern of discourse. So instead of just answering the question, I need heating assistance today, they may tell a story. And that story can go all over the place. And you can imagine how this plays out. This can play out among friends. It can play out in an agency setting. It can play out with a police officer asking a question of a witness. You get a story, and to the person who's used to the formal pattern of discourse with a direct question and a direct answer, this story comes out of nowhere, and what you thought was going to take, a minute and a half is suddenly taking 12 minutes because, I was hanging out with my aunt and we were doing this, and, which seemingly had nothing to do with the question that I asked you. And this can cause some miscommunication because, say, an agency person who's there to help you get heating assistance starts looking at their watch. And the person who's looking for help thinks they're being disrespected. And it's not that the casual register person necessarily needs to change, the casual discourse person needs to change, or the formal person needs to change their expectations. It's both things that we can do in our community to make sure that those conversations and communication are happening. So other ways that this can play out, it also, people who are living in generational poverty, and I'm sorry, generational poverty is like second or third generation. It's not just, sometimes we're in situational poverty, we lose a job, but we still continue our middle class values. It has to do with, growing up in that generational setting. And we can, so people who are in generational poverty tend to see body language very differently, because people who are middle class use words a lot more to navigate situations. We negotiate more, and people in generational poverty tend to use their notice body language a lot better, which can play out in different ways. So think about in a classroom where you have a middle class teacher and students growing up in generational poverty. Two kids look at each other, the teacher thinks nothing of it, but the one student is like, that kid just gave me the stink eye, and he starts freaking out like, hey, did you see that look he gave me? Ms. Costa, did you see that? And she's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Like, just calm down. But like, the kid feels threatened, and the middle class person doesn't understand that. And so saying, just calm down, like, I'm not going to calm down, like, that was a threat. So the teacher is just like, I can't handle this. It escalates. The kid doesn't feel like he's being heard, sends down to the principal's office. And so being able to ask those questions of somebody when they escalate, people raise their voice, they escalate when they don't feel heard. And so asking those basic questions, like, maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying, and trying to get down a little further into those details can be really helpful. So the point of this work is that we want to build a community and build relationships of mutual respect. So define, so building those relationships means getting into some of these weeds, thinking more about how they impact our daily lives and the work that we do and the relationships that we have. But there's also these other constructs that are important. Oh my gosh, see, Linda, this is a lot faster than we thought. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Linda just added something. Many of us use casual. I'm going to go back a slide then. Back. It's not going back. There we go. Okay. Many of us use casual discourse sometimes and formal discourse other times. Thank you, Linda. It's important to know when, in what circumstances, to use formal or casual discourse patterns. Otherwise, people might misunderstand what we're trying to say or even turn off their listening altogether. That's true. So can we think about, maybe we should chime in. Can you think about a time when this sort of thing has happened to you, and maybe does someone want to share that? Just type it in or unmute yourself.
I was saying to Alyssa yesterday, I mean, this is one of the times where we have the public presentations. We have 10 by 10, and people are giving essentially performances of things they've written. And imagine if you went to a 10 by 10 and somebody stood up and they were speaking in formal discourse. They set out something that was what they wanted to say, gave you a few facts about it, and then got right to the point, and they're done in 30 seconds. Would you feel like, what did this person ever stand up for in the first place?
Yes.
In that kind of circumstance, you're there to hear somebody's story. You're there to get all of the twists and turns and become intrigued and drawn into the story itself. On the other hand, say you've gone to the supermarket and you can't find something that you want to have. You're looking for, I don't know, say broccoli, and there isn't any broccoli out. And you go to somebody who is working there and you say, can I have some broccoli? You don't want the story of why the broccoli isn't there. You just want to have the broccoli put in your hand, or be told that there isn't any today, but you don't want the whole story about how the truck broke down or this or that. You just want to get your food and get out of there. So yes, we all use these in different ways.
Yes. And Lo says, I was working 2 part-time jobs where one spoke very casually and the other spoke very formally. It was really hard to switch between the two. It was only at the more formal place 2 days a week, and she was only there for 2 days a week, so that they wanted to make sure we got to the point and quickly got through our tasks. I had more time at the other position, so we were able to take our time and speak casually. That does make a big difference. And you know, I've had days at this job where I'm at lunch at the Christian Center, and a dinner event with a fundraising event or something like that, and I'm around wealthy people that I can barely relate to, and trying to traverse that language and the body language and the hidden rules. It can be it's a lot, and we have all of that going on in our community at once, at our work, when we're getting services, among our friends and family, and it can be challenging. But as soon as you start thinking about these things, it's like you feel like Nemo in the Matrix, in that you're seeing all the hidden code behind everything, and like, oh, I know what's going on there, and it can really make a difference. And the more you spend with these, the more time you spend with these concepts, the more you can, you see them in the world.
Yeah. And another thing to add here is that um, formal being very direct filters out a lot. And so if you really need to have more detail and more understanding, you're going to get a lot more out of casual if you have the time to look for it.
Yeah, we just did a training for some Berkshire Health Systems healthcare workers, and it can, when we have programs that were developed through the lens of the middle class, we're not as effective in our work, and it doesn't quite fit with the people we're trying to serve. So, for instance, you have a middle class mindset creating a healthcare program that requires maximum of 15 minutes for a visit. You've got someone in there giving a casual register to explain what's in a casual discourse to explain what's going on with them, and what was supposed to be 10 minutes turns into 30. And we need to give the time that a person needs and account for that within our scheduling. And that doesn't necessarily happen. And there's also tools that as a provider you can give somebody to help them map out these stories that make it a little better. So for our institutional program, we can talk about that a little bit.
Another thing that happens here is that if you ask a direct question and you're expecting a formal response, but the person doesn't really know, there's no way to, people tend to more likely give an answer that isn't really the true answer because they don't know what the answer is. And in a more casual discourse, you have more opportunities for asking questions, for really getting through what might be underlying what the person is trying to say, but they, in the beginning, they don't know how to say it. And this happens to all of us.
Yes. Zach says that he prefers casual over formal, partly because that's how it was raised, and partly because it helps to foster relationships. Even and especially at work, you want to build relationships with your coworkers. You can have a crappy job, but if you like who you're working with and have a rapport with them, it makes it tolerable and fun. Being confined to formal language prevents that a lot of the time.
Yes,
So
that's another really good point. Yes.
yeah. And so you can see how all of these ways of looking at our neighbors, whether it be, uh, the level of resources that they have, the lens that they see the world through for their mental model, or the way that they talk, can really either create welcoming spaces and foster understanding, or it can be detrimental. And understanding those differences is really key to the Bridges concepts. Back to building relationships of mutual respect. So at Working Cities, we always try to create that space, the valuing of everyone's time. A lot of times at the tables we're paid to do the work that we do, and understanding that when a person with lived experience and somebody who's actually taking the time out of their day, maybe taking time off from work, and not getting paid to be there, we need to value that time that the person spent. So we do pay our resident experts when we have programming. We understand the challenges, and so we always offer free food and childcare at our programs, and sometimes transportation when we can, because we realize that those are barriers to participation. And so anytime that we can do that is really helpful. Oops. Why is that doing that? Oh, I see. That came up first. That's funny. Okay, I gotta fix that. Ah. So we also need to build some long-term support for individuals in our community, also institutional and community. But understanding those strategies, we can do that as employers. We can understand that working $11 to $14 an hour doesn't make you the most stable person. It's not your, it just comes with being under-resourced. And we're not saying that employers, should have to pay more, although we'd love that. Sometimes business models don't allow for that. But a business model can include some understanding and extra supports and flexibility in that. Understanding that our neighbors may need a little more understanding and just a check-in once in a while, because they may need that last minute ride to work or something like that, that we can help with, or just connecting them to resources, which is why Working Cities is starting our Navigator program. We'll have people in the community who can be that connection, not just to resources like social service programs, but to social capital, and making sure they're at the table where the people who are making decisions are.
Yeah, I want to go back to the mutual respect. You don't have to turn the slide, but to talk
Thank you.
for a minute. Because for a city to work, for a city to be both resilient and vibrant, it's important to have relationships of mutual respect that span all through the resources categories, so that you can have people sit down together and have a chat, and actually learn from each other and enjoy each other's companies. A little story here, back to the 17th century in England for a second, and when they first had coffee houses, they did very much like what we do in working cities in the beginning. You only have your first name, you don't have anything else. So it flattens the whole group in a way, becomes more horizontal, and that's what happened in the coffee houses. So anybody was welcome, mostly men, but were welcome to go in, and there was no difference in class once you were in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of being able to have a conversation with people that you don't normally, because of differences in business concerns, get to talk with, is very, very valuable in making the city a good place where ideas surface, because nobody is going to have all of the perspectives, and we need different perspectives in order to see the whole, and make the whole better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I love including this quote. If you've come to help me, you can go home again. But if you see my struggles as part of your own survival, then we can work together. I think it's really important to understand that our destinies are intertwined in the Berkshires, that if some of our neighborhoods aren't doing well, Pittsfield isn't doing well. If Pittsfield isn't doing well, the Berkshires aren't doing well. And so we need to come in solidarity, that we all can benefit from doing this work better and doing it together. We cannot develop successful programs without the people who are with lived experience who we're targeting. We can't just sit here in our middle class bubble and say, oh, I know how to fix that, when we really don't know. We need to all be a part of that conversation. So there's a lot of ways you can be involved in this work. You can participate in our future webinars. We're going to be doing 2 more overview webinars like this. The next one on March 6th from the organizational standpoint lens, and one on March 20th from the, I'm just looking at from the business lens, and how to help people do that. So you can pass that information on. We'll have that on Facebook, on our website, and links to those registrations like this. We'll continue to do webinars twice a month. One is a basic overview, and then one deeper dive into these ideas of either the mental models, the language registers, or the resources, and really think about those a little bit more. But if you really want to get a lot out of it, the all-day trainings are where it's at. It really gives you time to be in the space thinking about it, and that's really important. You can join us for Working Cities Wednesday. I think pretty much everyone on the list here has been there, so I don't need to remind you. February 28th is our next one tomorrow night, 5:30 to 7 at First United Methodist Church, Penn Street. Our March meeting will be March 28th at the Christian Center, and we always rotate locations because of transportation. You can bring the concepts you learned today back to your organization and be a driver of change where you are. So just raising some of these issues, inviting your coworkers and colleagues to participate in a webinar or sign up for the trainings when they're announced. So we can do this as a full day or 2-day session for organizations and businesses and individuals. And it's great if you, we try to have at least 20 people in those. So if you can't meet the 20 people criteria, you can invite other individuals and organizations to the table with you. And then you can volunteer with us. We're always looking for space for meetings, people to provide rides for residents to join those events. We will, the summer's coming, we're always looking to staff tables so we can spread the word a little bit. We're always looking, because we provide free food and childcare, offering people who can provide that food, or either from a business or individual standpoint. Folks know Kate often cooks for Working Cities Wednesday and Getting Ahead. And if you can offer childcare, or you know somebody who can, the person needs to be Quarry checked. And then mentor your neighbors, and just understanding this stuff can make a big difference in how we interact, and be that social capital that helps someone else along who may feel isolated. Poverty is really isolating because you're always in that tyranny. And so anytime we can connect people back to the power structure of the city is a good thing. And then you can always contact me at Working Cities, and we're very active on Facebook, as you know. We also have our website, so you can find out more information. We're always posting when our meetings are and what other opportunities to connect people are happening in the city. So I want to thank you all. I think we're just under our hour, I promised. Only an hour, so we hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to reach out to me if you want more information or to schedule a training, and we'll be in touch soon. Have a great day, everyone.